Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze. She was the darkly graceful monarch Ophiri, proficient in French and enigmatic with each look, memorable in a black dress. Carolyn Jones, the individual who Morticia Addams alone. However, behind the glamorous grace and ethereal beauty, where most people never saw a lady fighting conflicts. What was Carolyn Jones's true fate? Why was she throwing up blood in midair? And what startling finding did physicians make when they made her available for urgent surgery? Her last years were full with sorrow, secrets, and one final unsettling turn. From Hollywood's Litz to a deserted house, this Carolyn Jones's undiscovered story, her suffering, her marriages, her diminishing wealth, and Morticia's enduring legacy Addams. Follow along as we reveal the actual woman who created the Gothic symbol. From Carolyn Jones was notable at a young age. Born in Amarillo on April 28, 1930, Chloe Jeanette, a homemaker from Texas. Julius Alfred Jones, barber and Southerner, Carolyn was a clever, creative youngster, girl who enjoyed narrating stories and amusing everyone in her vicinity. Even when she was younger, it was obvious she had anything unique. However, it wasn't only an ability. Additionally, there was a strong force behind it. Carolyn was an avid admirer of vintage Hollywood and transferred that enthusiasm to her daughters. Indeed, Carolyn, after Carol, her favorite actress Lombard, together with her younger sister B, following B. Davis. From the start, Carolyn had nightmares that influenced her life. The big screen. Sadly, her childhood was not glamorous at all. Her parents' tense relationship was caused by exacerbated by the demands of the Great Depression. In 1934, Carolyn watched her father walked when she was just 4 years old, unwilling or incapable of abandoning the family beer. The cost of the responsibility any longer, unable to provide for her daughter Carolyn's mother by herself, who else suffered from agoraphobia, relocated with girls into the home of her parents, what taught to have served as a shelter shortly, turned into a terrifying environment. The residence was cramped and little, and Carolyn's grandfather's temper was so terrible that frequently made her tense. For someone who's so youthful and emotionally delicate, that the transition was too much to handle. Regrettably, from then things would only get more difficult. Carolyn's early years took a different turn, a challenging turn, when she experienced a severe instance of long-term asthma. Her state was so bad that it turned into potentially fatal. She stayed for weeks at a trapped in her bedroom for a long period, unable to go outside or take pleasure in a typically life. Carolyn felt alone and isolated, sought solace in her fantasies. She listened to music all day long, and looking through the Hollywood fan periodicals, retreating into a realm distant more glitzy than the one she was used with in Texas. Those peaceful, dreamy horso to seed. Carolyn wasn't merely looking for, wanted to read about the stars, become one. Thus, when she learned about the esteemed Pasadena Playhouse is an acting Hollywood producing squadalent, and she aimed Aquarian. However, there was an issue. Queer acting was not accepted by her grandfather. Take your dreams seriously. She was shoved toward a more realistic career route, such as law or medicine, even brought her to Southern Methodist University with the hopes that she midled around. She didn't. Rather, Carolyn cried uncontrollably while sitting on bleeding on the steps of the university. Rotundado allow her to pursue her passion. Her emotional appeal eventually succeeded. Her grandfather gave in, and at the age of 17, Curly was admitted at the age off Playhouse Pasadena in 1947. She was committed to becoming well-known for herself, and it was quick for her life to undergo more transformations than one. As she continued her education, she met Don Donaldson, a classmate in August 1949. There was instant chemistry. The pair fell in love and got married in a short time, 1950, a year later. However, not all of them were certain that their brief romance would last. When Carolyn first met, she was only 19. Don Donaldson, who may sound similar to the beginning of a romantic college romance until you learn that Dawn was 27 years old, that age gap somewhat alters the tone, doesn't it? What could have appeared to be a tornado romance begins to feel a bit more complex. Regardless, their union didn't endure. Only a year later, the pair decided to terminate marriage. Give up. Following the split, Caroline threw more than ever before into her work. Despite the heartache, she utilized her emotional experience as stage fuel, putting her all into her performances. She studied diligently and took her training seriously, tenaciously, and utilizing her summer singing and stock theater performances, both to enhance her CV and assist with her tuition with her assistance a grand. Following 3 demanding years after years of hard work, Caroline eventually received her degree from the Playhouse in Pasadena as one of exceptional pupils. However, like Manu grads with lofty aspirations, she was severely impacted by the industry's reality she was attempting to enter. Ability wasn't sufficient on its own to land the kinds of offers she had fantasies about. Hollywood requested a specific appearance, and she understood that she would need to modify more than her acting abilities. However, Caroline Allardy has an enduring organic beauty. She was under pressure to start over from scratch, to fulfill the demands of the film industry strict requirements, so she did. In motion, that was brave and devastating. She had a significant change, blonde hair, plastic surgery, and a sophisticated posture, a clothes, and an accent of her whole. It was expensive and agonizing choice, but one she thought was essential. What? She was unable to know as that this makeover would be different, more than her looks alone. It would influence the course of her whole career and have repercussions she never anticipated. Caroline's Changinto, her new role in Hollywood, let's refer to her as Caroline 2.00, altered thegamacamally. Shortly after her transformation, Ash was seen on stage by a talent scout at Thuring Theater for Players. He was impressed, set up a screen test, and prior to Hirsch, secured a 6-month contract before realizing it. With the Paramount Studios. The break was the cause. She had put in a lot of effort. However, even ASOS, her star rose. There was a bitter turn. Despite being happy to finalicrillin, get her foot in the door, could in, single quotes to get rid of the persistent feeling Thatch. Didn't get there because of her talent, it was the way she looked. The reality that her redesigned look was a major factor. Her career was launched in part by something she resented in private. Hirsch later reflected on this internal struggle, performing a part on Dr. Kildare, a lady who had no surgery only. To get enraged when men start acting expressing curiosity about her. Men with ignored her before, sound now. However, there was none at the time, reversing course. Caroline, formally created 1952, saw her make her big screen debut in the title turning. Couldn't that have been more appropriate? Her relatives were ecstatic. Her mother shed happy tears, and it was said that her grandparents danced all over their living room. Unfortunately, the festivities ended. Lengthy, despite the encouraging beginning, Caroline only secured 2 additional, minor jobs before Paramount granted her a Delron out. And suddenly, her momentum despaired. It appeared that Hollywood had already gone. In terms of money, underwent a sharp decline. She hadn't made almost as much as she had hoped. Additionally, as the roles dry up, her bank account did as well. Things were really difficult. That her sister B had to move in for the sole purpose, fastest, in paying the rent. Backed up against a corner and observing her fantasies as they faded, Caroline felt compelled to remove certain frantic measures to maintain her optimist. Caroline, still alive, plunged herself into Enish, was able to locate an acting opportunity, though she was only moderately successful on television, which was sufficient to maintain her stay afloat for the following 2 years. While this time, she also made the decision to go back to the stage, giving a performance at the Preston Theater of Sturgis Players. However, her time acting wasn't all there was to it. Additionally, it signaled the beginning of a new phase in her life. Caroline was at the theater when full in love with Aaron Spelling, a wannabe author who will eventually turn into a well-known for creating memorable Beverly Hills and similar. Series 900,210, they clicked right away. both of them having trouble establishing themselves in their regions of expertise. But Sharinga, love of entertainment, and a fantastic armor. Their goals and the personalities were a fantastic combination. And if sparks were in the air in no time, despite her career's failures, Caroline was feeling quite happy, feeling hopeful about both of them both personal and professional lives. Next, lightning struck again in 1953. Caroline was cast in the television series House of Wax, significant 3D movie, and a big event at the considering that it was only the second 3D film ever made available. Movie was an enormous success, establishing her first significant advancement in theater. Even movie critics paid attention, lauding her work. For a moment, Carolyn was ecstatic at the time. At last, her career was taking off yet concurrently. Her connection with Aaron was starting to stumble, Carolyn fervently believing they were soulmates, awaiting a proposal. But Aaron washes sitant. He desired to wed her, but believed heckled in, until his career was secure and had a stable income. Sensation Caroline, feeling irritated, chose to taking things into her own hands. Caroline was a lady who was aware of her desires and wasn't scared to act bravely to obtain it. Angry about Aaron's reluctance to propose, she decided to handle things herself. Hands, which was a really uncommon choice for a 1950s woman. In an action that stunned Aaron and everyone in her vicinity, Caroline asked him to marry her. Hazeron surprised everyone by saying yes, in the Peripral marriage 1953. Nevertheless, Caroline's judgment didn't end there. In yet another audacious move, which deviated from the conventional 1950 essays, decided to concentrate on housewife mold, her profession over establishing herself in the typical role of a mom. As soon as the topic of beginning a family was brought up, Carolyn realized right away that it wasn't the correct route for her. She believed that having children in order to fulfill social norms wouldn't be reasonable. Not to her upcoming offspring, and not to herself, of course. She was resolved to prioritize her career, and she was aware that motherhood would obstruct her goals. That's uncommonly prudent choice, particular for that duration. However, as we shall see later on, it would come at a high cost. Continue, Caroline's dedication to her work was going to be paid off. When she discovered Thea casting executives' attention at images from Colombia, he noticed something and gave her the opportunity to pursue. A major from here to eternity's Rolethi most anticipated movie from the studio this year. Lorene Alma's function was within reach. Additionally, upon a successful screen test, the part was guaranteed to Carolyn. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, my breakthrough position that might solidify her position in Hollywood. However, on Leeson's everything appeared to be falling into Carolyn's aspirations took an unexpected turn. Tragic turn. As Carolyn believed that her fortunes will soon change, the night before her big event tragedy happened, test the screen. Affected by a serious case of pneumonia, as well as an extremely elevated 104 degree of illness. She found herself in struggling. For her life in the hospital, fight was at the worst possible time. Shellist her opportunity to play the desired part in section from here to eternity. That went to Donna Reed in the end. To Creotato make matters worse, Reed later won on a scar. For the part, therefore Carolyn has to ponder what may have been. Carolyn was devastated and battled with doubting oneself. She questioned whether her time in tension has already arrived and left. She was aware that she needed to change if she was never going to go back into the sector. Following a string of jobs that were unsatisfactory and came well short of, from here to eternity's splendor, Caroline got a part in Bachelor Have a Party. However, this section needed a significant change. She trimmed her hair short and entirely redesigned it by dyeing it dark. Her gaze once more, additionally, once more. Thethy change was successful. Dared her new appearance and turned into an instant fling. Despite the fact that her screen time with Bachelor celebration lasted only 8 minutes, Carolyn's performance was recorded in minutes. The media's and critics' attention. Abruptly, she found herself being interrogated by reporters. Above all, she received a nomination for an Academy Award for Top Supporting Actress. Following all of the obstacles, Caroline was at last getting the acknowledgement she was due. She was able Toyu could almost taste that golden statue. However, things weren't going to be that simple. When the big night Erevascoralin's dreams were crushed when it arrived, again Moshe Yumai won the Oscar. Rather, Caroline was forced to make do with bittersweet pride of just being nominated. Although disappointing, this Carolyn's resolve was only strengthened by the loss to continue moving forward. In 1958, Cher received her greatest chance to date a film next to Elvis Presley. However, as Itis had happened, filming alongside the king of net exactly, rock and roll was thin counter she had dreamed about. At that there was no denying that Elvis Presley was an enormous star, and King Creole was planning Toba's final movie before leaving Tooth Military. However, once more, Carolyn's it was at the worst possible time. She contracted a fever of 101. In spite of her extreme illness, she kept her position, which Miantelvis was granted the privilege of exchanging romantic instances where the subject is barely holding it collectively. Not quite the dream circumstance, correct? Fortunately, Elvis Haddad has a good sense of humor, as Carolyn found it difficult to remain upright. According to reports, she was afraid while filming fear she might unintentionally acquire Himmel. Desperate to keep from kissing them scene, she begged for forgiveness. However, ever the jester, Elvis, is said to have said to her, "That's okay. Perhaps it will remove me from the army." Putting germs aside, although King Creole was popular, Caroline's response to her achievement wasn't precisely what one may anticipate. Although many would have rejoiced in the praise, Caroline discovered that she was trapped in the Samanoing rut. She was cast all the time in oddball supporting parts when Shetterly desired to take the lead. Lady, when she was offered a role. As a star in her professional life, she made careful to insist on portraying Shirley's romantic element, adopting the unconventional sidekick role function. However, things didn't go quite as intended. Despite Caroline's performance is highly commended, and she was given Thegriatis career reviews, career bummed at the theater, hurt to fail, and maybe that's when Caroline began displaying different forms of behavior. She plunged in, diving right into the Hollywood way of life, resolute to fulfill the glamorous image she believed she owed her followers. Sheened her spouse lavished money on a spaciosa, 13-room home with deep tennis court, swimming pools, and most significantly a fountain of soda. Caroline's clothing waspers were in stock, and she accessorized with glistening gems. Ultimately, Shea assumed it was all fan-related experience. However, as they say, there was unrest in paradise nearby corner. In 1960, Caroline was still awaiting her breakthrough as a letting Lodi. She was determined to fulfill her goal, a fact. However, over time, the media craze surrounding her subsided, and there were fewer and fewer job offers. Paradoxically, when her career began to fading, the writing career of her husband, Aaron, took off, and he suddenly emerged as the more prosperous. One in their connection, the change in their professional life, are stressful. Union Caroline couldn't suppress her emotions, disheartened. And shortly after, fissures became visible. Items gate to the point where Aaron started remaining out late without justification. The confidence had vanished, and Biogastarin and Caroline got divorced in 1964. But they continued to get along well. However, Caroline found herself feeling like her everything was crumbling. It's just 34 years old. It appeared that everything was coming apart. However, destiny had other ideas. Carolyn had rejected many TV offers from the past, rejecting the notion of performing on TV, since she had had a lifelong desire of being a movie star. But then an offer arrived that might alter everything. A prominent position during the day display, not just any role either. This one was humorous, dark, and eccentric. Additionally, it felt specifically tailored for Caroline. It was the ideal fit, and she sprang for joy at the chance. Carolyn became a member of the Addams family in 1906. For like the well-known Morticia Addams, the program would turn into a turning point in her profession. But it also generated a lot of dispute. When the Addams first appeared on September 18, 1964, Viewers were instantly captivated by the passionate chemistry between Morticia and her fictional spouse, Gomez. Their audacious public demonstrations of love. Gomez even gave Morticia a kissed arms. Astonished conservative viewers. However, the responses to their on-screen romance seemed insignificant in comparison to the difficulties Caroline encountered. Dorcia's distinctive appearance. Although Morticia's trademark dress might have wore it and looked amazing on screen, was an entirely different matter. Gown gut, really clothes that Caroline could hardly move in it. By the conclusion, it took her a good 20 minutes each day of filming. Peeling it off takes minutes. The outfit eventually designers had to incorporate Velcro to the dress's back to make it simpler to enter, exit, and provide Caroline some flexibility to switch between takes. However, in spite of the inconvenience, it was all worthwhile. Even though it wasn't that Caroline had a glamorous career in film, the Addams family provided everything they had always hoped for, the fame she had long yearned for. The show turned into a phenomenon in pop culture, and a show was well known at the age of 35, with enormous fan base. It was all of it. Caroline soaked up what she had hoped for, every second of the limelight. However, as swiftly as it had all arrived, her dream came crashing down simultaneously. Even though the show is incredibly popular, it was decided by ABC to discontinue the following only 2 seasons. Addams family Caroline was heartbroken, regardless of how, despite her years of hard labor, it waste person who had actually placed her on the map. She pondered without the show, where she would proceed. Throughout the year following that, Caroline invited a few guest appearances on different programs, but work offers were still hard to come by. She started to wonder why. She was now so closely related to Morticia, which her playing was unimaginable to audiences and anybody else. It seemed as though her identity was inextricably linked to the character, and it turned out to be a two-edged sword, with no obvious path forward. Arlinskria suffered a significant setback and then recovered apart farther distant than ever. With little choice, Carolyn looked in the only direction she couldn't fit the stereotype of Morticia Heater. She got a part in Thethy Homecoming on Broadway, but what should had been a speedy fresh start turned into a letdown. Caroline detested all of it. Her annoyance and resentment started to seep into her personal life, which resulted in her making some impetuous choices, especially in her passionate existence. Depressed and looking, Caroline sought solace in her vocal Herbert Green coach. What began as a relationship quickly developed into anything more. Furthermore, by December 1968, the pair were married. Caroline thought it was an opportunity for a new beginning. A second chance after she married Aaron, she fell in love. The spelling was sloppy. However, Thethy relationship's actual stato be much more intricate. Numerous Carolin's pals didn't like Herbert. They thought he was strange. And it was said that the behavior was off-putting. There was a darker aspect to his charisma. And it's soon after, he persuaded Caroline to move with him and abandon acting to Palm Springs. Now alone, and in the absence of her profession, Carolyn's once bright life became gloomy. 7 years, but at last she understood that her senses were totally gone. Of happiness, she missed performing. And in spite of understanding how challenging it would be to starting her profession at age 46, Carolyn was resolved to give it a shot. She ended up unhappy, married, moved back to Los Angeles, packed up when she started the drawn-out, gradual procedure of taking back her life. The finest aspect, she was still in the spotlight. Caroline returned successfully to performing following a lengthy hiatus, landing appearances as guests on TV programs and performances in theatrical shows. Following such, after a long absence, she was pleased to regain her feeling of purpose and contentment. However, it appeared that the stage was more than simply a location for a career comeback. Additionally, it served as the background performance. In one of her theater performances, Carolyn suddenly collapsed for Peter Bailey Britton. Her co-star and the two soon developed a romantic relationship engaged, but as things were in Carolyn's life, through her CURV EBALL While traveling via air from Dallas to an evening in Los Angeles, she turned into extremely sick. She barely arrived at the bathroom prior to her spitting up blood, and fear took hold. Fearful and uncertain, aware of what was taking place, she hurried to Thea as soon as she touched down. There, medical professionals conducted emergency surgery to remove a sizable amount off her abdomen. Initially, Carolyn blamed ulcers for the disease, but her reality was much more dire. She was identified as having colon cancer, a news that really took her by surprise. In spite of how serious the situation is, Caroline decided to conceal it, choose to have grueling surgery and arduous chemotherapy behind closed doors. She had only recently recovered her life track. She was now confronted with the hardest fight of her life. However, even in the middle of this catastrophe, Caroline stayed dedicated to her work, resolved to keep her health struggles to do what she wants to do cherished. Following Caroline's cancer diagnosis remission, she was cast as the lead in Capital, the soap opera. As she was beginning to become comfortable in the role, a catastrophic discovery was made by doctors. Her cancer had come back. Dedicated to battle with all of her strength, Carolyn plunged herself into accommodative therapies. However, in spite of her best attempts, her body stopped reacting, and there was nothing else the physicians could do to offer. In light of this unpleasant fact, Caroline decided to live her life. Last days according to her wishes. Playing had been her passion all along, and she wasn't ready to allow anything to take that away. In spite of the discomfort, she persisted in acting on Capital. When the cancer spread and her health deteriorated, Caroline's fortitude increased even further. Obvious, she was now too weak to conceal her sickness. So she finished her scenes while in a wheelchair, declining to allow her health to be a hindrance. To her, LeBear? That woman is tough, isn't she?
Oh.
There, respect, please. Even as Carolyn faced the end and filled her time spent with as much love and joy as possibly she was able. In September of 1982, she married Peter Bailey, her boyfriend, and a little ceremony, Britain. Desiring Tobe the finest version of herself on her big day, donned lace and applied makeup with care to conceal her hair loss, and a ribbon cap. The ceremony was a heartwarming occasion, one that inspired her co-stars to admire her, and all those acquainted with her. Carolyn was genuinely a natural force, and her co-stars acknowledged that in here at stay. Nicholas Walker, who performed in Capital, her stepson, once remarked that the lady's bravery and fortitude is incredible. She had a difficult week. On Monday, performed surgery on her, and she was back on the set by Saturday and Friday.
Next to her position.
On Sunday was at theater. It demonstrates her strength and resilience. Regretfully, Carolyn got into Acoma at her West Coast home in July 1983 Hollywood. In August, she died. On March 3, 1983, at 53 years old. Following her cremation, there was a memorial service. On August 5th, at Willen Glassband Californian Mortuary in Altadena. Indeed, to her considerate disposition, Carolyn had made plans prior to her death to give away her famous Morticia outfit and wig to the motion picture, academy, sciences, and the arts. Her legacy persisted, containing an assortment of Addams family scripts that her widower subsequently provided to UCLA, guaranteeing her enduring Morticia Addams's portrayal would never forgotten. Concurrent with Carolyn, she passed away in 1983. Her wealth was thought to be approximately $1.5 million, asmal sum, given her witty career in movies and television. Carolyn having put in countless hours throughout her living on the majority of her income originating from her famous portrayal of Morticia Addams on her later life in The Addams Family. Capital is a soap opera. Returning to Thine in the 1960s, she made a good living with an average compensation for a television hanging around as an actress of her status. Each episode cost $1,000, which was a reasonable amount at the time. Carolyn's additionally her success enabled her to invest in a lovely residence in West Hollywood. She resided in California in the latter years of her life. Her home was a lovely mid-century modern home representing her individual style with its clear lines and large windows that gave spectacular city views. Thethy house included open areas, a sunlit living area with elegant furniture, offers a stylish yet comfortable ambience. The home has a beautiful garden as well. It provided a tranquil haven for Carolyn, particularly as she maneuvered through fight against disease. In spite of Carolyn's home's grandeur kept a simple and grounded lifestyle, prioritizing coziness over extravagant. The life of Carolyn, both on and away from the display, was brimming with extraordinary displays of strength, tenacity, and indisputable talent. As we considering her amazing journey, we wish to communicate with you. What are your thoughts? What does Carolyn's legacy signify now? Additionally, how do you recall her portrayal of Morticia Addams? Put your ideas in their marks below. Remember to support us by watching this video and subscribing. I'll see you in the upcoming video. Goodbye.